I like belonging to a church with different kinds of people in it. It would be a really unhelpful church if everybody were just like me. And way, way more boring. So Charlton and Sue and Robert and all the musicians, thank you all for leading us this morning to remember the gospel again and again and again. This morning's reading from the gospel reminds me of a really interesting story. In 1968, Frank Borman goes on one of the most glorious trips that any human being has ever taken. Frank and two of his fellow astronauts launch into outer space as the crew of Apollo 8. And they end up making a total of 9 passes around the moon. They are the first people ever to see the moon that close. And between their 4th and their 5th passes, they become the first people ever to witness an Earthrise. Do y'all know what an Earthrise is? They watch our planet Earth rise from over the surface of the moon, just like we watch sunrises and moonrises. And Frank takes a picture of the Earthrise, and it becomes one of the most famous images in history. If you Google the picture, which is just called Earthrise, you'll probably recognize it instantly. He saw it in person. And after the mission finishes and the astronauts return to Earth, Frank gets asked a question by a reporter that he ends up getting asked the rest of his life, and you could probably imagine the question, what was it like? And his answer for the rest of his life is always some version of this: it was okay. Sometimes in some interviews he compares it to a really long car trip. Or, he's a scientist, he's an experimental pilot. This is just another day at work. It's just another purely scientific observation. I don't know what we can assume about Frank Borman, but we do know that for him, space travel was just fine, I guess. How can anybody experience all that glory and feel so little about it all? Maybe you're an emotionally flat person. Maybe you're a Frank in this story. Maybe you're not. But one way or the other, the question does get raised. Can you feel more in the presence of glory? Can you not just understand it, but can you feel it? That's what this morning's story is all about, encountering the life-changing glory of God up close and personal. And the story shows us that you and I can experience the glory of God, and we can walk away emotionally flat, or we can rejoice. And what's the difference? John shows us the difference. Here's the point of this whole story, that the joy of God's glory comes through faith in Jesus. That's the difference between joy and no joy. Faith in who Jesus is and what Jesus does. God's glory is a fact. He is glorious. He is amazing. But when we trust in Jesus, the fact of His glory becomes an experience for us. Again, the joy of God's glory comes through faith in Jesus. What about Jesus? Faith in what? What about Jesus leads us to experience the joy of God's glory? I really think John shows us 3 things. It's not always 3 things, but this morning I think it really does come down to 3 things in this story. Faith in what brings us the joy of God's glory? First, it's this: faith in Jesus' compassion. The Jesus that John knew, the Jesus that he now wants us to know, that Jesus is compassionate. Let me tell you another story. It's 1947 now, and quick show of hands. Does anyone recognize the name of the Major League Baseball player Hank Greenberg? Well, in 1947, it's Hank Greenberg's 18th and final season playing in the major leagues. 1947 is also a big year for another reason, because it's the first season for Jackie Robinson, the first ever black man to play Major League Baseball. And when the two play each other, when their teams compete, something interesting happens. Robinson hits a line drive to the outfield and is running to first base, and Greenberg is covering first, and in the process of making the play, the two collide accidentally, and Robinson falls on the ground. And Greenberg does something that everyone in the stadium gasps when he does this, because when he knocks Robinson to the ground on accident, he immediately looks over, bends over, and reaches down to help Robinson stand back up again. This is a really big deal in 1947 because this season, as it's gone underway already, many of the white players in the league have intentionally tried to hurt Robinson or at least avoid him really awkwardly and obviously. And so for Greenberg to make it obvious that he doesn't mind this guy playing with him, he doesn't mind showing kindness to him in public, it becomes this public spectacle. And maybe this makes more sense if you understand something about Hank Greenberg. In 1947, and for all of his professional career, he has been the most famous Jewish athlete in the world. I don't know that you could get away with it these days, but you know one of Hank Greenberg's, one of his many nicknames is the Hebrew Hammer. He spent his whole career putting up with hatred because he's a Jew. And so, when another player, another guy who's an outcast, a second-class citizen, when Jackie Robinson just needs someone to show some kindness to him, of course Greenberg helps him. But do you see how just a little bit of compassion goes a long way? The whole world notices that it's such a big deal that after the game, the reporters come into the locker room, and the first question that is asked of Jackie Robinson is, what was that like? You know, what was it like after this season for someone to show you some kindness? And Jackie Robinson's quote, this is his entire answer. You ready for this? Class tells. It sticks out all over. Next question. He's right, isn't he? Class tells. Class outs itself eventually. And y'all, compassion tells too. You don't have to wonder for too long, what kind of person is this guy or this girl? Back in Cana in Galilee, we need to understand it is terribly embarrassing for a wedding host to run out of wine. The way that weddings work in this culture, it's expected that the family of the wedding party is going to provide food and wine for the entire village to spend several days partying to celebrate the newlywed couple. And failing to provide for the party is something that would follow them, that would haunt that family for the rest of their lives. It's a huge problem that would go on for decades. And so Jesus' mother comes to him, assuming for some reason that he's somehow going to step in to help. Somehow his mother knows he's the kind of guy who provides for people, who helps people in need. And what does Jesus do? He seems to say no, doesn't he? I think if we look really carefully at verse 4, he doesn't say no. What does he say? He says, not yet. And that's not because he doesn't care. That's about to become super obvious. Jesus really does care for these people. But what does it say? His hour hasn't come yet. And so he kind of bluntly says, it's not really my concern yet. Do you see how John does not explain what this means? We need to get used to this because he's going to keep doing this. John is going to introduce an idea. He's going to include a really weird and cryptic thing that Jesus says, and he's only going to explain it way later. So if you are reading this and you're like, I don't get it, what is he talking about? His hour hasn't come yet. That's good and right. You're supposed to feel that. John just wants you to file that away. But all we need to know for right now is there is going to come a time in this story when Jesus shows his glory and when he provides what other people need in a particular way, and it's not going to be subtle. It's just not that time yet. Whatever that means. But it's not much of a letdown, is it? Because what does he do? Look at this. What does he do? It's always dangerous when I do some back of the napkin math. And there's a lot of people in this room who are better at math than I am. But I think my math is right here. I did some quick back of the napkin math. 6 or 7 of these 6 stone jars, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. That comes out to what? 120, 180 gallons of water? A little more quick math. That comes out to between 600 and 1,000 bottles of wine, which comes out to somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 glasses of wine. Does Jesus provide not just booze for the party, but does Jesus provide what this family needs to avoid lifelong shame? Yes, right? Abundantly, richly, overwhelmingly, Jesus provides. He provides way more than they need, supernaturally, and really and truly. Jesus does what we would call a miracle, but what John calls a sign. Signs point to things, right? That's the whole point of them. What is this sign pointing to? Well, first, and really obviously, it points to Jesus' heart for people. Specifically for people who don't have what they need. And let's get really specific. People who don't have what they need, and because of that are facing serious, lifelong embarrassment. Jesus cares about people who are ashamed. Friends, if you're a Christian, you and I have to see how Jesus feels about people who lack and who are shamed. Right, this is MLK week, right? I know that kind of got put on the back burner, what with some weather stuff going down, but this is a week when it would be especially appropriate for us to remember that, everybody in this room has a bunch of problems. But there are many people, and our neighbors, members of our church, people sitting here this morning, that their problems in some ways are at least a little bit harder because of their skin color, and that's a lifelong issue. And Jesus seems to care about exactly that kind of thing. And so, if we follow Jesus, it should matter to us too. And not just MLK on Monday, but what was the day before MLK? It's something that's been a nationally recognized day for almost 50 years now. The day before MLK was Sanctity of Life Sunday. We live in a culture, we are part of a church where there are many people that we personally know who have aborted their children. And it's not usually because they think abortion's no big deal. Most women choose abortion because they feel like they need help, but they do not know where they're going to get it. So it feels like they don't have a choice but to make this life-altering decision, one that will follow them forever, and despite what the culture tells them, is never something to publicly talk about. Brothers and sisters, Jesus cares about that. So we should too. Again, we're only skimming the surface here, but far be it from us to miss obvious application. Racism is not a liberal issue, and abortion is not a conservative issue. They are Jesus issues. They are issues of compassion. So they're issues for us to be aware of, to consider, to imitate Jesus' compassion toward. When the neighbors in our nation and in our neighborhoods and in our workplaces and in the pews we're in, when our neighbors need help, let's imitate Jesus. Let's have compassion with the power of the Spirit, and let's show compassion. Let's care for real people made in His image. We are not Jesus, for the record. There would be an application here I could make, and I could say, you fix the problems your neighbors experience. And that's not at all what John's trying to say, is he? There's only room for one Jesus in the story, and he got the role. But what are we like? We are a lot like the servants in this story. We're not doing any miracles. We're not creating any signs. But brothers and sisters, you and I can bring Jesus' miracle to real people. Our secondhand compassion that we're just drafting off of Him for, when we show compassion to the people around us, it helps people. And in the context of this story, can I can I simply submit, helping other people with the compassion of Jesus, in Jesus' name, can make us feel happy. If we've experienced the glory of God through faith in Jesus, when we've experienced His compassion, when we respond like that, it feels good. Jesus spares people from hardship and from shame because His compassionate heart can't do otherwise. And so we who follow Him, with His Spirit in us, let's serve people like He allows us to, like He brings us along to do. Brothers and sisters, that point literally anybody could see, whether you follow Jesus or not this morning. Jesus literally meets literal needs. That's our first point, right? Because He is the God of compassion we can trust in. But let's see beyond that first point. Let's look at a new point to the story, because John is not interested in recording this story and saying, hey, look at what Jesus can do. No. This particular story in the Gospel of John is just the first example of something Jesus is going to keep doing. He's going to keep doing things. John's going to keep telling Jesus' story in a way that doesn't only record some miracles. John is going to continue to record the miracles of Jesus and emphasize the spiritual, the deeper meaning of the miracles. John's not just going to say, here's a sign. John's going to keep showing us, what does the sign point to? And that's our second point here, that the real way Jesus reveals God's glory and brings us joy, it goes beyond just trusting in Jesus' compassion. That compassion itself is a sign pointing to something greater. Something that can bring you and me, as real people in Effingham, even greater joy. The joy of God's glory comes through faith in Jesus' compassion first. And second, the joy of God's glory comes through faith in Jesus' fulfillment. The fulfillment of promises that came a long time before this wedding ever goes down. And here's what I mean. To explain what John is showing us, let me tell you a story. I'm reminded of when I lived for a time in Southeast Asia. And in the country where I was, every bathroom is all tile. Tile on the floors, tile on the walls, tile on the ceiling. And, not just that, every bathroom has a removable shower head. Why is that? Because in this particular country, faithful Muslims wash their whole bodies every time before offering their 5 times a day daily prayers. The whole body, from head to toe, has to be washed with fresh water. Their religion tells them that they could never come into their God's presence dirty, filthy with sin. Only somebody clean, not just physically, but morally clean, could ever pray to their God, they believe. In verse 6, we see something that's not totally unlike that. In verse 6, John gives us this hint that there are people throwing this wedding, or maybe just attending this wedding, who are observant Jews. They're religiously aware. They, even at a wedding, are going to need access to water, and it's not just to wash their hands free of dirt. They need water to symbolically get clean before they pray and give thanks to God and then eat the meal. And if you were to go digging through the weeds of Leviticus like I did this week, you'll find out that the Bible itself does not require this specific kind of ritual washing. That's not a part of the Old Testament law. It must have been a tradition that develops over time, but we can see where that tradition comes from. Because in the law, we do find a bunch of examples for all kinds of ritual cleansing, for all kinds of parts of everyday life. And here's the thing, as you and I maybe are following a Bible reading plan right now and we want to know God's Word like Miss Sue encouraged us, we get to Leviticus and Numbers. Maybe some of us get to Exodus first and we recognize, yikes, these laws are tough. I don't know what to do with this. Now, we can respond in lots of ways, but here's one way we can't respond. We cannot read the law of God and say, that's bad. That's stupid. Jesus never calls his own law bad or stupid. But what Jesus and his apostles are going to show us over and over again, that things like this ritual washing they're not bad. They're just very limited in what they can do. It's like this, God's law is like a mirror. It points out very accurately what is wrong with your face. But it cannot do a single thing to make you less ugly. Same thing with the law. The law shows us just how much we need to clean up if we want to come into the presence of a holy and a loving God. If we want to contact God's perfect glory, the law shows us that we got some problems. But the law cannot do a darn thing to fix those problems. Not even a little bit. Not even to make us 1% better, more deserving to come into God's presence. The problem is not with the law. The problem is not with rituals. They just can't fix the problem, can they? The problem is not just whether our hands are ritually clean, whether you and I do or don't do the right things. The problem is deep down inside of us, what the Bible calls sin and evil. I'm not just making this up. This is in the Bible itself. We could go to a number of passages, but let me point you first to Hebrews chapter 9 in the New Testament, where the Bible itself says that's what's going on with the law. Listen to this. According to this arrangement, the laws of the Old Testament, gifts and sacrifices are offered that cannot perfect the conscience of the worshiper. They deal only with food and drink and various washings, regulations for the body imposed until the time of Reformation, it says. Did you catch that? The writers of the Bible look at the Bible and say, this always had an end date. The law and its rituals were always just keeping time until the Reformation would come. That's Hebrews chapter 9. When does the Reformation come? Enter Jesus. His first public act after calling his first followers is performing this miracle, in John's language, doing this sign. It's turning water into wine, but not just any water, is it? The water for ritual washing is turned into wine, but not just any wine, is it? It's fine wine. It's rich wine. Jesus turns the water for ritual washing into the good stuff. We need to catch up just a little bit so we can understand the glory of this. We need to catch up and understand some things the first readers of this book, they would have known the second they read it. Yes, the Old Testament describes how water gets used for all kinds of ritual stuff. But the Old Testament also describes some stuff about wine. It's not just literally something to be drunk and thanked God for. It's not just the stuff you drink. Wine is so often in the Old Testament a symbol. Not like these washings, not a symbol of our need to get clean before God. No. How do the writers of the Old Testament use wine? It's a symbol of the good times to come. The time when God would send the Christ to renew and to remake our broken world. Wine is a major flag that good things are coming. So many examples again we could look at, but let me just point you first to Amos chapter 9, the prophet Amos in the Old Testament. God sends him to communicate his message to the nation of Israel almost 800 years before Jesus is born. And this is the very end of his message in Amos chapter 9. I think the words might be on the screen. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes, him who sows the seed. The mountains shall drip sweet wine. All the hills shall flow with it. I will restore the fortunes of my people Israel. They shall rebuild the ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine. They shall make gardens and eat their fruit. I will plant them on their land, and they shall never again be uprooted out of the land that I've given them, says the Lord your God. Do you see, friends? Do you see what the Jews at this wedding would have seen? What the Jews and Gentiles who first read John and understood the promises that had been given already. The Jews at this wedding know they have to wash themselves before saying grace at the reception. How are these Jews supposed to know that the old covenant, with all of its laws and with all of its shortcomings, how are they to know that it was coming to an end? Let's zoom the camera out even more. How would the whole world know that God doesn't just promise to fix our sad, broken world? How would we know that He's starting to do it? There would be signs. Specifically, a supernatural amount and quality of wine. What Jesus does here at the wedding is just the first toast to a new age coming that will never end. When God begins to restore the fortunes that were lost because of sin and evil, to restore the fortunes of everyone who trusts in Him, and they would be restored forever. And as you listen to this, friends, don't you have some sense inside you that your very best intentions to be a good person will never be enough? Maybe you're at church on a Sunday morning. Maybe you're a religious person, maybe. You and I will never say enough prayers. You will never give away enough money. You will never sing enough songs or raise your hands high enough or do anything on a Sunday morning that takes away what you do Monday through Saturday. You'll never do enough. And maybe this morning you're listening, but you're not a religious person. Can I apply the same concept to your life? You will never be a good enough parent. You will never work hard enough. You will never balance the scales in your life of the good and the bad, let alone erase the bad and max out the good. Dear friend, you will never do enough. And so, in the words of an old hymn, see what Jesus is showing you. Lay down your deadly doing. Lay it down. God does not renew our world or your life through anything you do. He doesn't bring you into the new heavens and earth like that. Friends, it is Jesus. It is all Jesus who can and who will make you clean before God when you trust Him. All of your sin washed away. All of your shame covered. All of your traumas and your suffering, they are healed and restored. Everything wrong with you and me, Jesus came to cleanse and to restore. Jesus came to transform your good attempts at making up for being bad. Your attempts that never work and, quite frankly, are a terrible burden on your heart. Jesus came to transform them into joy, into life, to bring you into the wedding reception. And it's not because you washed your hands right before you walked in the door. It's because your Jesus so longs for you to experience the joy of God's glory. He longs for it so much that He takes your and my imperfections, our filth, and He carries them away through His death. And He credits you and me with His squeaky clean, joyful record by rising again from the dead, never to die again. Brothers and sisters, dear friends, won't you be persuaded to trust the promises Jesus gives you? Wouldn't you trade everything and receive from Him unending joy in this life and in the life to come? Won't you, brothers and sisters who know this already, won't you see all over again how Jesus fulfills everything His Father has promised? Everything your heart ever wanted. Won't you see that this morning again? Maybe you still have questions. They are okay to ask. Because your Jesus is patient with your asking. Maybe you're sitting here this morning and you're thinking, so, okay, Jesus is a nice guy. And, okay, He's God's chosen one. He's the Christ. And He started to fix the world. One day, it's all going to be fixed all the way. Wine, party forever. Okay, so what? Now, some of us might be a little impatient with that question. What do you mean, so what? But we see it's okay to ask that question. But asking it shows that you need to see one more thing John is dying for you to see. It's not just what Jesus does that deserves our attention. He shows compassion. And He fulfills the promises of God. Jesus does stuff, and that matters. But it's who He is that matters most. Let's see that third and that last point. We experience the joy of God's glory through faith in Jesus, through faith in Jesus' glory. It's the glory of Jesus that creates our faith and that brings our joy. Andreas Kustenberger points something out I missed, maybe you missed it too. Everybody in this story is anonymous. The only person whose name is specifically mentioned is Jesus. It's like John wants all the attention just to be focused on Him. Why don't we get more details about how the water becomes wine? Because that's not the point. Who was getting married? It doesn't really matter. It's not germane to the story I'm trying to tell. What's the name of Jesus' mother? You've read Matthew. Fill in the blank yourself. The point is not to fill us in on details. The point is to get us to stare long and hard at Jesus. And if we're not sure about that, look again at verse 11. John's summary of the whole shebang. This, the first of His signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested His glory. That's the point. That's the moral of this whole story. Jesus is glorious, and He showed it off so that real people could see it. He's beautiful. Your Jesus is breathtaking and awe-inspiring just in who He is. I mean, we don't got to pick between who He is and what He does. He's both. He's the whole package. But your Jesus is, in who He is, wonderful. The law is like a mirror that can only show us ourselves and our failings. But Jesus is like a window. You can see the window. We can see Jesus. And we can see through Him and see God Himself. When you see Jesus, you are seeing His Father. This is what John's already prepped us to believe. Remember back in chapter 1, starting in verse 16, from His fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one's ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known. Jesus is glorious because God is glorious. And we can see that because Jesus shows us. And when we trust and we follow Jesus, his glory leads to, eventually, through all the pain, through all the suffering, through all the questioning, his glory leads to our joy. That's the logic of the gospel. Grayson really helpfully reminded me of this earlier this week. Look at Romans chapter 5 and the words of the Apostle Paul. Therefore, since we've been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Through him, we have also obtained access by faith into this grace in which we stand and we rejoice. Hope of the glory of God. Rejoice, Paul says, because you have faith in Jesus. Because you have seen Jesus, and in seeing Jesus, you have seen the Father. Let your heart feel the excitement of knowing the same Jesus who's returning one day to restore the order of the universe to what it should be. He is bringing something wonderful, and that affects today. This last week, we experienced something magical. Snow days in South Georgia. And for not everyone, but for many of us, the world just felt different. All of our daily rhythms were just abandoned. The world felt fresh and clean. Adults were playing outside with kids, like kids. The opportunities for so much fun were all around us. It was so special. It was so joyful. Brothers and sisters, the new heavens and earth will be like an eternal snow day. All the fun, all the magic, all the joy. And the Jesus who gets you there is the Jesus who will be there face to face for you to see forever. The life of the party. The one who saves the day at the wedding is bringing the party to us forever. And so let's worship him. Let's rejoice today and always. I'll invite the musicians to come forward because how can you not sing to this Jesus? He promises to work through music to build us up, to teach us, to change our minds and our emotions, but this Jesus has also promised in a way that music just can't scratch an itch like this. Your Jesus has promised that when we come to his table to eat this bread and to drink from this cup, we are experiencing just the littlest hors d'oeuvre. It's not time to cut the cake yet. The groom's not even here. But here's a little snacky stuff to tide you over until the real party starts. That's what this supper is. We're not in Cana in Galilee. We are in Effingham County, Georgia, in the year of our Lord, 2025. And one day, he is coming. We don't have to wait until that day to meet with him, not only in prayer and through scripture reading and meditation, not only in the fellowship of the church. We meet with Jesus through the work of his Spirit when we come to his table. And if you have come to know him and trust in him, and if trusting him has changed your life, that you've repented and changed your life to belong to him, and that's affected your relationship to sin. If you've been baptized as a member of his church, because how could you not belong to whatever family he's in? And if you're not a member of our church, but you are in good standing with your local church, brothers and sisters, Jesus is waiting to meet with you at the table. If you don't know him yet, we care about you. We love you. we would love to persuade you to know this joy yourself. We're going to pray for you in a moment. But the host of the party says not to come to this table, not yet, because this is only for those that he's called to himself by faith. So please feel free to remain in your seats while the rest of us now stand and sing. And at any point during this song, brothers and sisters, come to Jesus at the table.